Hello, welcome to a presentation on some ideas for playing with language that I've called collectively creative vandalism. In this presentation I'm going to highlight just a few ideas, but my hope is that you'll be inspired to use them as a starting point for things that you can do with the students you teach. Vandalism. Vandalism is usually thought of as a negative thing. Yeah, a morally reprehensible and destructive act, perhaps. Hey, who did that to my picture? At least, that is likely to be the angle shared by those who have experienced having their property defaced or damaged, or those who think that the results are nothing more than a defacement and spoiling of what was there originally. But of course there is a nobler and more honourable angle to be considered as well. From such an angle we're invited to consider that the wrongdoingness of vandalism should be exonerated for the sake of this nobler cause or valuable awakening. Well, in this context you might think of the work of the British graffiti artist Banksy. Banksy is actually a very good reference for the meaning I wish to convey here, because it reinforces the qualification creative in creative vandalism. For the work of Banksy is meant to wake us up in some way. It's a creative vandalism, opening up possibilities for how we might think and be. You might say it's an art form that's meant to make us pay attention to what is really going on with us and with our environments. And that, without needing to get too political and dangerous, is precisely what I want us to consider that we do with language, especially when we think of language as a kind of environment. An environment we instinctively have faith in and assume is very meaningful, even if we don't always get it. And thus the native hue of resolution, like the poor cat in the adage, is cicled o'er with care, and all the clouds that load o'er our housetops, with this regard their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. But soft you, fair Juliet, open not thy ponderous and marble jaws, but get thee to a nunnery. Go. Is there something fishy about that? You bet. It's fake Shakespeare. Just lines taken randomly from several plays. But interestingly, when I've given this to middle school students, I'm not telling them that it's fake, and I ask them to see if they can make sense of it and in their groups produce a modern English translation. It's amazing what they can come up with. Of course, I'm really doing this for a bit of fun, but I'm also trying to inject some confidence around studying Shakespeare. I mean, heck, if we can make sense of nonsense Shakespeare, we might be okay with the real thing. Yeah, the real thing, what is that? A human female, extremely captious and given to opposed behaviour, was questioned as to the dynamic state of her cultivated tract of land used for the production of various types of flora. The tract components were enumerated as argentus tone-producing agents, a rare species of oceanic growth, and pulchritudinous young females situated in a linear orientation. Isn't this interesting? Well, how about this version of it? See what we've done there? Well, how about this? 3 unseeing rodents. Observe the method of self-transportation. Separated their rear appendages with a cutting instrument. Can you recall observing such an extraordinary phenomenon in your living consciousness? Might sound better like this. Okay, so I call all this creative vandalism. It's where we're messing around with certain aspects of the rhetorical resources of the original version of the text and deploying other rhetorical resources that are normally taken as inappropriate for that particular genre. Nursery rhymes don't normally go in for nominalisation. It can be refreshing and empowering to do this kind of thing, as well as revealing of what is going on with the normal text. Here's an example I might use as part of getting students to pay attention to certain aspects of the genre of explanation. Stinky, polluted air contains dust. Doesn't the word just make you want to sneeze? Achoo! As well as grit, soot and harmful gases. And we know where a lot of them come from, don't we? What a stink! A medium-sized town can produce over £10,000, and that is a really humongous amount of yucky air pollution each and every day. Some of the naughty harmful gases even combine with sunlight to make really evil babies called pollutants. An example is ozone. There's something wrong with this, isn't there? What is it? Do you see what's going on? The original text has been played with in ways that make it odd, but reveal something about how the normal way is meant to work. What we've played with here actually is the modality system. That is the set of linguistic resources that modulate our statements, indicating how we are orientated to our statements and how we'd like the reader to be orientated to. We've created a modulated form of the original text that is completely inappropriate to a scientific explanation. Okay, next I'd like to show you a form of creative vandalism that I've called, for reasons that I hope will become clear, shadow texting. So here is a delightful book that is actually a very sophisticated book, I think, even though it's for very young children, because it has two plots that are simultaneously going on as the main character, Rosie, goes for her walk. So the book is Rosie's Walk by Pat Hutchins. On every page we hear about where Rosie goes around the farmyard. Now what you see on the screen here is the complete text of the book, but it's actually spread out across lots of pages. Now at the same time as we hear or read the story, we see a fox pursuing poor old Rosie around the farm. Fortunately, the fox never gets his prey because there's always some obstacle in the way, like a rake that hits him when he steps on it. So imagine doing a joint construction with young children and producing a text like this one. Maybe something like this. Billy the Rabbit went for a hop across the field, around the dam, through the gate, under the bushes, and got back in time for lunch. So let's put this side by side with the original. So I call this a shadow text as a way for getting the students to emulate and think about the rhetorical resources of the original. In ripping off the original, we're learning something about how it works. Well, I'd like to end with two examples from another text. One that is an adaptation of a creative vandalism, and the other another application of a shadow text. And the text we'll be using comes from this wonderful fantasy novel, The Lampfish of Twill by Janet Taylor Lyle. The book opens with a very evocative description that orientates the reader to the world of the story. Well, here's a version of that opening. Twill is an island. Its coastline is very dangerous. There are lots of rocks on the beaches with riptides with strong currents in between. These currents have made deep holes in the ocean floor where whirlpools suck in anything from the surface of the water, such as logs, buoys or birds. Sometimes a whole ship is lost in these whirlpools. Most ships that are lost have gone onto the rocks. You can see their broken hulls lying on ledges. This reminds sailors to keep their own vessels away from the edge. No ship came to Twill's coastline during the season of storms. This was for half the year. The other half, the season of calm, was a bit better, but not many ships came. Okay, pretty pedestrian, right? Okay, well then, listen to this version of it. The country of Twill lay on the sea. Its coastline as treacherous as any in the world. Sharp claws of rock stretched out from the beaches, and riptides and murderous currents churn the water in between. These currents had carved deep pits in the ocean floor where whirlpools howled and sucked from the water's surface whatever log or buoy or bird chanced to float within reach. Sometimes a whole ship was lost in this manner. Over the years, many ships had met their end along the coast of Twill. Most had gone on the rocks. Their smashed hulls could be seen dismally rotting on ledges, a reminder to sailors passing to keep their own vessels far out to sea. No captain in his right mind ventured near Twill's coast during the season of storms, which made up half the year. And even during the relatively peaceful season of calm, which was the year's other half, Twill's one port languished for lack of trade. Now, this is beautiful, isn't it? I mean, I want to read on. In fact, it's the original opening of the book, written by Janet Taylor Lyle. The first version I read was a vandalised piece. What did I do to it? Well, I was very mean. I tried to take away all the evocativeness of the writing. I left in the basic information but took out any uses of language which seemed to add to creating a rich picture and feeling about the place. For example, where the original version says the country of Twill lay on the sea, my vandalised version says Twill is an island. That's it. Too bad, because there's something interesting that's being communicated in saying Twill lay on the sea. We don't think of countries lying on the sea normally. Was it comfortable about being there? Where the original version says sharp claws of rock stretched out from the beaches, and riptides and murderous currents churn the water in between, my vandalised version says there are a lot of rocks on the beaches with riptides with strong currents in between. So how is the original so much better? Such a question is important if we're interested in learning something about the art of storytelling from this wonderful piece. So after I've read out these two versions, the vandalised version and the original version, the proper version, I've read them out to the class. I'll ask them what was different about the two, just from this oral reading. I'm going to have them in groups then conduct a more systematic investigation. They each are going to get a copy of the two versions and an almost blank matrix like this one. And in groups, their first job is to pull out phrases and wordings from each version and insert them in the table next to each other for comparison. They get to choose which wordings to pull out. And then once they've gone through the whole text, we can start to have a discussion about the differences between the two. We can literally compare and contrast the two sets of wordings. What is it about the wordings of the original version that give us such a clear and concrete sense of the situation? Well, rather than answer such a question in general terms, we're going to look at each instance and see if we can articulate what's going on. It's a chance for me to elaborate on certain rhetorical resources like alliteration and metaphor. So get the idea. I'm trying to promote a real interest in how the original text is working. How, in other words, it is a literary text, a literary achievement. And I'm doing this by comparing the original with the vandalised version. So what could we do next? There are lots of possibilities. Perhaps I could give them another vandalised paragraph and ask them to restore it to a more evocative state, and then compare their version to what the author actually did. Or I could give them a fragment of a good literary text and ask them to creatively vandalise it. And by creative here, we mean something like be able to identify what is working well in the original text and undermine it with an anti-literary version. Pretty mean, eh? Yes, but requiring attention to how rhetorical resources have been deployed. The text was designed, and I want the students to mess with that design in the interests of thinking like designers. And here is yet another example. This one is more in line with the shadow texting I showed you earlier. So it starts with a grid, the original version, and the shadow text version on the right. So the original opens like this: the country of Twill lay on the sea. What this is doing is telling us where the landscape is in relation to other landscapes, and it uses a preposition to do it, on, right? So a possible shadow text that replaces the aquatic world of Twill with, let's say, a sci-fi world of planets and spaceships might look like this. Planet Goth circled the sun Orion in the galaxy of Nebularis. Notice it too uses a preposition, in. Original version: its coastline as treacherous as any in the world. So the original goes on to compare Twill's coastline with other coastlines. It uses a comparison word, as. So a possible shadow text might look like this: its surface as inhospitable as any in the universe. Sharp claws of rock stretched out from the beaches, and riptides and murderous currents churned the water in between. These currents had carved deep pits in the ocean floor, where whirlpools howled and sucked from the water's surface whatever log or buoy or bird, I've lost my place, chanced to float within reach. So this next section, well, it has lots of wordings that produce strong evocations, doesn't it? It basically tells us what the landscape does and how it behaves, almost as though it were a living thing itself. Certainly it has a great deal of personality. To describe behaviour, we use material processes: stretched out, churned, carved, howled, sucked. Fantastic. To make descriptions more specific, we use nominal groups with adjectives to qualify the head noun. Murderous currents, deep pits. Beautiful. Wow. So our shadow text will have to deploy similar rhetorical resources, and it might look like this. Angry volcanic peaks rose up from the desert plains, and boiling lava filled its glowing streams, lakes and seas. These lava pools generated a magnetic field so powerful that they drew in passing meteorites or droid probes or whatever space debris chanced to get too close to Goth's orbit. So original version, shadow text on the right. Sometimes a whole ship was lost in this manner. Over the years, many ships had met their end along the coast of Twill. Most had gone on the rocks. Their smashed hulls could be seen dismally rotting on ledges, a reminder to sailors passing to keep their own vessels far out to sea. So this next bit tells us what consequences follow from the behaviour of this landscape. The landscape is actually behaving. What is the main consequence? A whole ship was lost. Okay, that was the main idea, which now gets enhanced by describing what results from this. What's the phrase that means as a result? Over the years, right? Okay, so what could we come up with? Sometimes a whole starship was lost in this manner. Over the eons, many gargantuan vessels had met their end on the planet's surface of Goth. Their heat-pocked hulls feebly sending a futile distress signal, a reminder to space commanders passing to keep their own crafts far away from Goth's orbit. Then in the original we're told that as a consequence of this behaviour, no captain would risk coming near to Twill's coastline. No captain in his right mind would venture near Twill's coastline during the season of storms, which made up half the year. Now, what single word suggests this would be risky? ventured, right? We're told no captain would come near, and this statement is qualified. What's the qualification? In his right mind. So here's the shadow text. No space commander in her right mind ventured near Goth's orbit during the great Nebularis exodus, which occurred during Intergalactic War 3. And here's the final sentence in the paragraph. And even during the relatively peaceful season of calm, which was the year's other half, Twill's one port languished for lack of trade. And I think the shadow text continues deploying largely the same rhetorical resources. And even during the relatively peaceful eon of reason, which followed Intergalactic War 3, Goth was almost deserted of any intelligible life form. Almost. Uh-oh. Okay, so you can bet that as we do this, I'm discussing with the students just what work the text has to do. It's the beginning of the novel, and already we've had a world evoked and a sense that we're in a place that is both dangerous yet intriguing. So the shadow text has to do the same kind of work. It has to evoke a place that is hostile and barely habitable, create a setting where people might need to visit despite the danger, contain evocative physical descriptions, and evoke a world that has some similar features to our world but is also alien and exotic. This is partly how it makes us want to read on. Okay, well, I hope this has been food for thought and that the pedagogical value of all this will be striking. By playing with texts, taking them apart, translating them into different idioms, creating vandalized versions that then get compared to the original, writing shadow texts. Doing these kinds of things can help to promote a designer's ethos and hopefully also promote a deeper appreciation and interest in the ways texts work. I hope you'll agree that vandalism most definitely can have a nobler side. Okay, thanks for watching.